Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode in the psychological evaluation of serial killer series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Ed Gein. So, Ed Gein is often referred to as the Butcher of Plainfield or the Plainfield Ghoul. He was an American murderer and body snatcher who gained notoriety during the 1950s. He was born on August 27, 1906. And Gein's crimes included the murder of two women and the exhumation of corpses from local cemeteries. Gein was arrested in 1957, and he was later declared mentally unfit to stand trial. He spent the rest of his life in mental institutions and died on July 26, 1984. So here are some key points related to the psychological evaluation of Ed Gein. First one we're going to look at is schizophrenia and psychosis. So Ed Gein displayed symptoms consistent with schizophrenia, which is a severe mental disorder characterized by distorted thinking, hallucinations, and impaired emotional responses. He experienced delusions and auditory hallucinations, claiming to hear voices and receiving instructions from his deceased mother, which leads us to a mother complex. Gein's obsession with his mother played a significant role in his crimes. His mother, Augusta Gein, had a domineering influence on him, instilling a strong sense of guilt and shame. After her death, Gein's actions were driven by a desire to resurrect and preserve his mother in various gruesome ways. So if this is kind of giving you the Psycho vibe, like the movie Psycho, that's because that was probably based on Ed Gein, that aspect of it. The next thing we'll talk about is necrophilia and different gruesome practices. Gein engaged in necrophilic acts and had a fascination with the human anatomy. He created macabre artifacts, such as a woman suit, which he made from the skin of his victims. And he fashioned household items from human body parts as well. Probably the most famous of those was a lampshade that he made out of human skin. That leads us to isolation and social dysfunction, because you can't really do those kind of things unless you're in isolation. So Gein lived a very reclusive life on his family farm. He isolated himself from society. His social dysfunction and inability to form healthy relationships definitely contributed to his distorted view of the world. Next, we'll talk about sexual deviance and repression. So Gein's crimes included several acts of sexual deviance, and his actions were driven by a combination of sexual repression and distorted desires. His disturbed sexuality was intertwined with his mother complex and most likely contributed to the gruesome nature of his crimes. Grave robbing and mutilation. Before committing murder, Gein engaged in grave robbing. So he would exhume corpses from local cemeteries, and he would use the body parts of the corpses to create different artifacts, which would satisfy his morbid interest in anatomy and death. And like all serial killers, it is progressive. So you start first with smaller things, usually animals, stuff like that. And in his case, he began with digging up graves and pulling dead bodies out and kind of messing with them and creating things with their body parts and all of that. And then he moved on from there to actual live people. Next thing we're going to talk about is the lack of understanding and criminal insight. So Gein displayed a lack of criminal insight and did not fully comprehend the gravity of his actions. His psychotic symptoms most likely contributed to his impaired judgment and understanding of the consequences of his crimes. So it's not entirely clear whether he fully understood how wrong what he was doing was. He was kind of in a state where he was just acting on his impulses and his desires without really even considering whether what he did was right or wrong, or if it was hurting anybody else. The last thing we'll talk about is institutionalization. Following his arrest, Ed Gein was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. He was committed to a mental institution where he spent the remainder of his life. The decision to institutionalize him was based on the recognition of his severe mental illness and the need for psychiatric treatment. They decided to keep him for the rest of his life because it was fairly apparent that he posed a massive danger to society, and that even with treatment, that it wasn't going to be safe for the general public to allow him back out into society. Ed Gein's case remains a quite chilling example of severe mental illness and the potential consequences of mental illness not being treated. His crimes and his psychological state have been the subject of a lot of study and a lot of fascination, honestly, by a lot of people. And that's led us to better understand the thought process and the thinking of the severely mentally ill. And the last thing that I want to talk about in this video is, with cases such as this, where you have somebody who is so severely mentally ill and there's really no hope for ever fully rehabilitating them or getting them to a point where they can be fairly normal in society, that is a good argument for bringing back the idea of full-time institutions the way it used to be. See, in the old days, if you had somebody who was severely mentally ill, they would be put into a mental asylum, and they would just be kept there. And a lot of people were kept in those places. And that kept society as a whole a lot safer. Now, there were a lot of bad things that happened in those places. A lot of people were mistreated, and that's not good. You know, I'm not saying that that is what we want. But I think getting rid of the whole asylum idea completely, just because of some people doing some bad things, is kind of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing, right? I don't think that that was the right choice. Because if you look at society today, whether it is some of the events that take place at schools that are horrific, or even just the widespread homelessness problem. You know, I've done a lot of work with the homeless, and I can tell you that the majority of those people are fairly severely mentally ill. A lot of them aren't capable of functioning in society properly, and that's why they're living on the streets. I mean, yes, you do have some people that just fall on hard times and end up that way, but the majority of those people have pretty substantial mental illness. And I think if we had a functioning asylum system that didn't mistreat people, but where you could put people that were mentally ill and couldn't take care of themselves long term without having to go through the mountains and mountains and mountains of red tape that you do now. I mean, now you can have somebody like Ed Gein out there, and you can only hold them for 72 hours, and you got to go before a judge, and I mean, there's a whole process, and it takes way too long, and it's way too much, you know, for some of these people. There are people that are severely mentally ill that can't function in society and are going to end up on the street in danger and endangering other people, but they're not psychopathic murderers. So they're not going to be kept in the system we have now because they're not posing a severe danger to society, and they're not suicidal, but they're going to end up dead regardless because they're going to end up on the street and starving to death or freezing to death because they're just not capable of taking care of themselves. And I think a good functioning asylum system would do a world of good. But we have to make sure that the abuses of the past don't take place in the future. So let me know down in the comments section what you guys think about it. As always, it's up to you to make up your own minds, and I will catch you on the next one. Till I speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do I. Bye-bye.